So, as many of you are probably well aware, it's been getting warm, right? In the last few years, it's been getting extremely hot, especially in the summers. But interestingly, in the last 100 years, only half of that is from climate change, and the other half is what we do to ourselves here locally. And that's coming from our built infrastructure, our roads, our buildings. And that's what we call the urban heat island. So the question is, what can we do about this 5.5 degrees? And so then we start to look at the fabric of our homes, our neighborhoods, our communities, our cities, and we look, and the typical neighborhood is 40 to 60% dedicated to personal vehicles. That's insane. That's a lot of space. So I have a map here, Google map of the star being where watershed management is. So that's where I'm currently sitting. And I just want to zoom into this neighborhood to give you a better sense. So this star is where we are, our living lab and learning center. And let's just start to look at what consists of our street infrastructure. So that's now in red, to what consists of our site-based parking infrastructure and driveways. And that's now in yellow. So that's crazy. And so this is where our transportation infrastructure is one of the biggest contributors to the urban heat island. And unfortunately, it doesn't leave much space for shading, cooling ourselves. So we need more space. So how do we do that? Well, there's many more efficient ways to transport ourselves than our personal vehicle. So I love this meme, this diagram, or not diagram, illustration of moving people, 100 people by car versus by bike versus by bus, right? So thinking about efficiency, we can be a lot more efficient with our transportation infrastructure. And then on top of that, it's a huge cost. Thinking about it's $5,000 to $10,000 to construct a surface parking space. I've heard upwards to $50,000 per space for a parking garage. That's insane. And that's not economic space. That's a sunk cost that we then have to maintain. It's not generating revenue. Then thinking about personal costs. So Lisa and I, we gave up our car 7 years ago. We've been saving roughly $10,000 a year by not owning that single vehicle. Now, if we had given up 2 cars, we'd be saving $20,000 a year. That's a lot more expendable income. We can now take more vacation. We can now do home improvements, or we can have whatever we want, right? It's a lot more. We can donate to our favorite nonprofits a lot more.
Hey, Catlow.
Yeah.
Just wanted to pause and say, no, there's a lot of information in this presentation, and we're happy to share it with you all after the fact. So if you're trying to scroll down notes furiously, just know that we can share this presentation with you later in the different links we have in it.
Great, thank you for that note. So a lot of us come at this from being interested in how can we impact and reduce climate change, right? And so thinking about that, we have all of these different options of from low impact to high impact alternatives, opportunities that we can participate in and choose. And interestingly, we can choose to replace our typical car with a hybrid, or we can switch to an electric car. But living car free has a much bigger impact than any of those other two options. And so this graphic is from 2017, but estimates roughly 2.5 tons of carbon per year being saved by living car free. Now, I want to put that a little bit into perspective because that's an average across the world. I love this graphic. It's pretty much the same, not as nice and neat, but it differentiates between different countries. And so living car free, look at the US. We are well above that 2.5 tons saving. And that's because we drive so much more, so many more miles in the year, and we have far fewer efficient vehicles. So looking at that, depending on what type of vehicle we choose, we can save 5 to 9 tons of carbon dioxide per year by not driving. Well, how many of us can comprehend, visualize what a ton of carbon is? I cannot. So I have a little visual for you. 1 car mile produces 0.9 pounds of CO2. Cool. Okay. 1 tree, I can visualize trees, absorbs 22 pounds of carbon dioxide per year. All right. Some math here. So 1 tree offsets 25 car miles per year, or only 1 day of driving for most of us. So how many trees a year do you have to plant based on how much you drive, right? Or as I think Chris said, as your family members drive in a year. So thinking about, what is that cumulative impact and how can we reduce that? We're not going to solve it by planting trees. And we can also approach it from a number of other issues. So this is Country Club Boulevard. It's interestingly, it could be a very direct way for my commute from home to work. But to be honest, I have not stepped foot on the street for years. I have not ridden my bike on this for years, because what do you see lacking? Please shout out, unmute yourself, put it in the chat. I want to hear from you.
No pedestrian infrastructure.
Exactly. Thank you. What's another issue?
No bike lanes.
No bike lanes. What's another issue?
No
shade.
trees.
No trees. What's another issue?
You're currently in this photo riding in the right lane and about to get smashed into.
Well, this is the Google car driving. But yeah, we can start to see. And what does the street promote? Speeding traffic, right? There's no visual barriers or slowing infrastructure. There's no bus shelter for the people who take the bus. No sidewalk. We said that. Not safe to bike. No access to nearby open space. No shade. So that's just a few of those things. Now we take it to a place in South Tucson that is, interestingly, right across this interstate is the Santa Cruz River, which should be a cooling corridor. However, there's no riparian vegetation, there's no access to groundwater, no flowing water, so it currently is not. But what else is a problem here locally in this neighborhood?
Not enough trees.
So we see a lot of the same issues to the prior photo, but interestingly, what do we see at the downstream end of the street? A storm drain. This street is a paved over arroyo. Our arroyos should be cooling greenways. Instead, we paved over them. And now we have flooding problems. And now we have an interstate that produces vehicle noise, air pollution, all of that diesel exhaust, particulates on these communities. We've disconnected them from the Santa Cruz River. So many things are going wrong in this. We can take that and a little bit at the macro scale is looking at heat maps. This is a heat map of central and downtown Tucson with Watershed Management's Living Lab, the U of A. In the pink dots, I've put on the map the bus stops. So the warmer colors indicate warmer temperatures. The cooler colors indicate cooler temperatures. Where are the hottest temperatures in this map? What are they along?
Intersections.
Intersections, bus stops, because those bus stops drive down, or the bus drives down those major arterials. So who's most impacted by this heat? And we just saw from the prior photo, many of our bus stops are without shading infrastructure. So it's those folks who are utilizing that bus system. And then where's the coolest infrastructure? Some of the more affluent communities, the U of A, some of the less affluent communities, underserved communities are some of the warmer, have some of the warmer temperatures. Now let's compare that to a traditionally underserved larger sector of Tucson, southern Tucson. So that prior photo I showed you of that paved over arroyo is right about here, with I-19 bisecting from the Santa Cruz River. This should be a cooling corridor, but it is not currently. So look at the temperature difference of this map to that map. It's a lot warmer. So what does that mean? There's not the greenery, there's not the shade canopy, there's not the open space, there's not the cooling corridors, there's over wide streets. So this is a problem inherent in our community due to traditionally being underserved, underdeveloped, lack of resources being dedicated to these spaces. So WMG and many other organizations are trying to do something about that. We're trying to plant more trees. We're trying to engage community. So this was a project many years ago we did with New Hope, Nueva Esperanza Church, right in that same neighborhood where I showed that picture of the paved over arroyo. They had a flooding problem. We're like, all right, let's address, at least we can address flooding on site. We can't address what's impacting you from upstream. So we found an opportunity to take this parking lot that was completely paved over, pull away these parking stalls, plant a few trees, capture some rainwater. We're like, great, we're growing trees, we're creating shade. Yet we still have to accommodate all of these personal vehicle spaces because of our development codes and regulations, and because our communities are tied, we force them to be tied to their personal vehicles because we don't provide transit, we don't provide better walking, pedestrian biking facilities. So there's so much more we could do, but we've kind of hamstrung ourselves. So now the question comes back to always starting with the personal self. What can I do? What can we do? And then building that into a collective to what can our community do? So this is where WMG and many others are also thinking, what actions can we take to help cool our cities by 5 degrees and enhance our community livability? And this is just an example from our last newsletter. Typical Tucson neighborhood on the left, hot, right? Who wants to walk on that sidewalk? Who wants to bike along that bike lane? Who wants to take the bus and wait in a hot bus stop? To then how can we transform with green infrastructure, shading our streets, shading our rights of ways, making it safer to walk, making it safer to bike, making it more pleasant to take the bus, maybe even dedicating a bus lane so the bus can go faster. So there's all of this fabric of things that we can do from a personal level to a community investment level. And this really comes down to developing choice. We're not going to get there overnight, but the more we develop choice participation, that's each of you here today, that's me, that's our staff, that's my friends and my family. If I can help foster choice, then that means we start to create a collective movement that can then basically start to demand for more investment in this infrastructure. And thinking about what are the benefits to me, quality of life. I get a little bit more exercise. I get some fresh air, especially along that bike boulevard. I get some time to read on that bus. Accessibility, health, savings. We've talked about much of this. To even our local economy, our local businesses, reduce number of parking spaces they have to construct and maintain, increased business space, retail space, eating space, savings on travel, fleet costs. Maybe our staff, when they're going to a meeting, don't have to travel by car, but they can take a bus. To then how do people access our own businesses, making it to where they aren't reliant on driving. And then our community, reduced air pollution, reduced carbon footprint, increased connections. You know how many friends and neighbors I see when I take the bus, when I take my bike? It's great. Whereas if I'm driving a car, right? I don't see anybody. I'm listening to my tunes, but that's about the only thing I got going on, plus a lot of frustration and road rage because everybody's in my way. Versus when I'm biking or I'm busing, it's a lot more opportunity to sit, wave, say hi, stop for a moment, greet somebody, chat to somebody on the bus. To then improve land use planning, right? There, it creates a lot more space for us. So I like to think about asset mapping. It's not about what we don't have, but what do we already have and how can we make better use of that? So again, using Watershed Management Group as an example, we have a bike boulevard, we have a transit bus stop, we have ped and bike crossings, 2 different areas near us. We have rarely used parking spots all around us. We even have local lunch options, so we don't even have to get in the car and drive. We can just walk to a locally owned business. Plus the amenities that we house within our organization. We have bike racks, a shower, a changing room, limited parking, so we don't allow staff to park in our few parking spots. We save that for the few visitors that do need to drive to visit us. We provide flexible work schedules to allow them to take the bike or to take the bus. We provide incentives as well. And then helping to promote shade along this street. A lot of our tours through our week-long water harvesting design certification are done by bike. Our docents, interns, I see a few of you here today, have joined me on the bus to engage and kind of learn how and reduce those barriers, perhaps uncertainties, or build confidence in taking the bus and planning those bus routes. So a lot of people ask me, well, what about electric vehicles? How does this fit in with sustainable mobility? And it's not that I'm anti-car or anti-electric vehicle. There's a time and a place, and there's a need, that's how our communities are currently built. But I come at it from more of an equity angle, is how many of us currently can afford an electric car? What about those who can't afford an electric car? How are we helping them get around? And then ultimately, this is what happens if we switch gas cars for electric cars. Do you see a difference in these roadways? I don't. Maybe some local air pollution differences, but that would be about it. We're just shifting that pollution to be in other places. Then also thinking about the cost of owning a vehicle and maintaining a vehicle, and the cost of going from gas vehicle to an electric vehicle. So I just pulled up four, I don't know much about vehicles, but I pulled up 4 vehicles. There's a URL here. You can have fun with this, choose any vehicles you want, do this comparison. So interestingly, I pulled up a Nissan Sentra gas. This is what Lisa and I used to have. Maybe it was a 2008, I forget. It was a much older Nissan Sentra, compared to a Nissan Leaf, a Toyota Prius, a Tesla. But with all of these, you're looking at the first year of ownership is at least $10,000. And then it just quickly goes to then lifetime accumulated costs for a Tesla is almost $100,000 over 15 years. That's a crazy expensive vehicle. Even the cheapest vehicle over 15 years, you're still spending over $60,000. So not just thinking about annual costs, but lifetime costs, right? And is that worth it? I would rather invest my money elsewhere. Oops, the arrows just shift. Most people own a vehicle around 5 years. So you can see, that's just about when the cost of ownership starts to decline a little bit. Then thinking about if we switch to electric vehicles, how much of our energy from our grid supplying that electric vehicle is from carbon-based fuels. So we're somewhere between 2020 and 2030. This is based on Tucson Electric Power's 2023 plan. And you can see predominantly right now, the bulk of our fuels is coming from coal and natural gas. Even by 2030, the bulk of our fuels is coming from coal and natural gas. So yes, you may have solar panels at home, but what happens when you go on that longer road trip and you're going to that quick charging station? Where is that fuel coming from? Now, I am curious and interested. I even have my own e-cargo bike, but thinking about e-bike and how that facilitates mobility for longer distances for those who may not have the physical stamina, for those who want to carry a little bit more. My e-cargo bike is like a pickup truck. That's how I get my chicken feed. That's how I do my groceries. They are much less than an e-vehicle. They are still fairly costly, but some municipalities are starting to incentivize that. I believe now Tucson Electric Power even has an e-bike incentive and differentiates if you're low income or not. So all of this kind of brings to, we need to choose mobility, but we also need to advocate for investments infrastructure, incentives, right? And so how do we go about doing this? What are some of these outlets? And I'd like to crowdsource. I just put a few opportunities here. I'd like to hear from you. What are some advocacy opportunities you've participated in where you see upcoming? So currently, City of Tucson and Pima County are starting their updates to general plans. That's a great way to say we want to invest in mobility. And so there's Pima Prospers, Plan Tucson. Perhaps if you're coming from the Phoenix area or other municipalities, they all have their own planning processes. Then we have the regional transportation authorities. So if you're not, perhaps you can get yourself on an advisory board. If not, call to the audience pretty much at the beginning of every meeting can be an important outlet for sharing that. And then we have our municipal transit, pedestrian, complete streets advisory boards. Again, with call to the audiences, we have local elected leaders, email, call, meet, et cetera. And then we have a number of different organizations all doing some aspect of advocacy in their own way.